special view. It's not what you feel.
We're looking at 5110, and we're dealing here with the concept of the microcosm. And so there's this interesting analogy between the structure of the human psyche and the Godhead, right? And so I'm trying to pursue the thought of how that analogy works and what the implications for us uh, turn out to be. And so Raw's talking in this instance about the indigo ray body, which uh, is said to be an analog for intelligent energy. It is in microcosm the logos. Okay, the logos is intelligent energy. The intelligent energy of the mind body spirit complex totality draws its existence from intelligent infinity. So, in effect, when you ramp up our beingness to the higher dimensions and reach the seventh, the gateway to the octave, you participate in the creation itself. You are a co-creator with the creator. So you are participating in the mystery of creation. Now, what was interesting the reason I included those other quotes is it became clear that uh, in infinity, when it is unpotentiated, there is not yet the creator. And Rob refers to that as the creation, which leads to the conclusion that the creation precedes the creator. Totally the opposite theology that you find in uh, religions of the book, for example, which always situate the creator as prior to the creation. The creator creates the creation. So here we have a circumstance in which there is the creation, and out of the creation, the creator is precipitated. Now that kind of goes against the logic with which we're all brought up, doesn't it? I mean, am I wrong about that? It in certain of the ancient uh, theologies, if you would call them that, like Greece, for example, there isn't a doctrine of creation ex nihilo or creation from nothingness like there is in religions of the book. There's a doctrine of the emergence of the cosmos out of chaos, and this theology resembles that in some particular ways. So uh, the emergence of the creator is a from infinity, which is unpotentiated, and I want to get to the notion of what that means in a second. Do we know what potentiation means in this regard, or what it means to be unpotentiated? No, minimally it means to have focus. Right. So infinity in its completely unfocused sense precedes anything we could call the creator. All right, now let me finish this paragraph and we'll see where that goes. The intelligent energy of the mind body spirit complex totality draws its existence from intelligent infinity or the creator. Now, intelligent infinity isn't infinity itself. It's infinity uh, already potentiated. All right. The, this creator is to be understood both in macrocosm and microcosm. That's us. To have, as we said, two natures, the unpotentiated infinity, which is intelligent. This is all that there is. Now, the footnote says the creator is to be understood both in macrocosm and microcosm, to has, as we have said, two natures, and they end it there and they say, indicating that a list of two items, and they say, presumably the potential and the kinetic aspects of intelligent infinity will follow. However, it is unclear whether the second paragraph constitutes the second item in that list. That misreads in two ways. It misunderstands what's being said in two ways. First of all, grammatically, because grammatically, what is being said is uh, the creator is to be understood both in macrocosm and microcosm, to have two natures. One, the unpotentiated infinity, which is two intelligent. The two natures are included in that sentence. All right. So it's so there are the two natures are one, the unpotentiated infinity, and two, intelligence. And that's all there is.
With the idea that the realization of intelligence infinity is the potential being released. It's or the potential being implanted, maybe.
Well, I think it would be
It seems
premature.
to be an analogy between intelligence and potentiation. That's all I'm saying.
Yep. Free will is the intermediate concept there. Free will potentiates, but it's not the potentiation because it's a multifarious process. That is, that the potentiation of infinity is what leads to manyness.
Right.
And manyness is finitude, and finitude is free will as we experience it. We experience free will finitely. Now, in intelligent infinity, free will wouldn't be experienced finitely, but it would be experienced in terms of focus.
Right.
And that focusing is potentiating as that's the query that I'm bringing to the group today. The focusing is the potentiating of infinity so that it may be experienced. Now, the infinity, go ahead.
Not a particular focus, but the concept of focus. In other words, the ability to drill down and block out the rest.
Well, I don't know about blocking, but the ability to differentiate.
Yeah. I mean, that's what differentiation is. It's creating a this and that.
Right. If you look at the Advaita Vedanta, the Indian tradition,
Mhm.
Advaita means undifferentiated unity, right? And so, if you look at that, uh, the, their view is that the first division is duality.
Yeah.
So there's unity and then there's duality. Duality means that you've taken up a relationship to unity. But if you take up a relationship to unity, the relationship thereby taken up is
Is
already not
duality.
unity, is
Yeah.
duality. All right.
Yeah.
So
This seems
uh,
to be like a real principle of mind at work here. That mind
yeah,
can have a concept that can sort of deviate in this way, right?
right. And so Ra will say that the creation, as we have it now, recapitulates in all of its stages the process according to which intelligent infinity developed. That is, infinity developed in its intelligence. And the first step is awareness, but not yet self-awareness. So that corresponds to first density, the kind of awareness that you have in rocks.
Yeah.
Not even growth, just awareness. And then beyond that, if you scroll up to the earlier texts which I presented, the back to the session 13,
Mm-hmm.
where Don's asking what's the first thing that happens in the creation? The answer, awareness. And then what's the second thing? Love. Now I found that very confusing at first because I was thinking, oh, okay, love is the second distortion, but we don't yet have free will. And so now it becomes apparent that we have three meanings of love in the law of one. The love that is the focusing of infinity, the first focusing of infinity, which Ra calls love or logos. So that's the grand logos. Then you have love as the second distortion, but that follows only upon the first distortion, which is free will. And finally, we have love in the sense that it expresses a certain stage of development, fourth density, the density of love, or the activity, or I guess this could be a fourth sense of love, or the activity that we engage in called loving. So that's a multi-layered term as you find it in Ra. But what the insight that I just had in rereading this material was that there's this first concept of love, which is not to be confused with the second distortion. So there's already a logos. And so when we talk about the distortions, we are talking about distortions of intelligent infinity, not distortions of infinity.
I see.
Does any of that make any sense?
Yeah, there has, if you think of intelligence as kind of like an inbuilt pattern to be expressed in what otherwise might seem chaotic or unformed, right? Like physics is a kind of intelligence in our creation because it has a regularity to it that can be understood.
Which is what Ra calls intelligent energy.
Right. And so this intelligence is that pattern inside of it. Maybe it's like the seed of the octave, right? The sort of, in computer science, you have this idea of a random number generator. You give it a seed, and that's kind of like starts the randomization. Yeah. It is an interesting point to say that we're not just talking about a creation, a sort of plastered upon infinity as a general concept, but this intelligent infinity. That is very insightful.
And
I
so
also
you,
I also wanted to bring up that quote of Ra, session 82, question 10, where they say the creator does not properly create as much as it experiences itself. So when we're talking about creation, creator, these are words that Ra seems to think are a little bit clumsy, right?
yeah, yeah. But now to pivot back to the notion of the microcosm, when uh, we as self-conscious beings have a unique capacity to traverse all of the levels of energy activation that are available at the third uh, rung, if you will, of evolution. So we can go from red through violet. And uh, as we reach the point where we're able to work an indigo ray, we are able to gain the access or the gateway to intelligent infinity, which means that we can recapitulate in reverse the pattern of the creation. That's in essence what we're doing as we are reaching that stage. And in that sense, once we begin to do that, we become active participants in the creation itself.
Uh,
That
should,
that's a
should I jump
pretty
in?
yeah.
Yeah, I agree. That's very impressive, and it's a very clear idea of what is meant by evolution. I feel like a lot of what the conclusion I've been coming to as I've studied this stuff more, is that one of the reasons why evolution involves a stage of self-awareness, of self-consciousness, is because that is the missing element that connects the more deterministic evolution of first and second density to becoming the creator again. There has to be the stage where we finally, of our own accord, can begin to participate in the evolutionary expression of that inbuilt pattern, right? Like we
Yeah.
intelligently become part, and that's sort of like learning how to become creators, right? Co-creators.
And so here's a question: does the creator experience itself independently of the creatures, us, and the whole panoply of intelligences uh, reaching into the higher densities?
Yeah, the problem with that question is, I'm sorry, maybe I'm talking too much, but do we know the full breadth of what experience entails, such that we could even talk about that, right?
I
Well,
don't think, I
no,
mean,
yeah, I mean, we can talk about it because we don't need to know the full breadth in order to attempt an answer to that question.
Fair enough.
I
It,
feel like
it would,
experience might not be the right word.
I'm saying I'm worried about anthropomorphizing things beyond a point of profit for us.
well, if we take an expanded view of who we are, inclusive of our higher selves and mind, body, spirit totality, uh, we already have sort of softened the edge of that anthropomorphism.
That's a good point. That's that we even though experience might be more at the creator's level than we can conceive of specifically, we can gesture at it because we are in some way tied to that experience, right?
We're contributory to it.
Yeah, we're in the spectrum. That's a good point.
You disagree, Christian?
Well, I think that there's I think we're starting to get into mystery, the things that we don't know. And when I think, like when I try to grasp the idea of a one infinite creator, I think it's something beyond experience, um, as I know it. And not to say that it's um, I think it's something we don't. That's
What do you do with that quote that Jeremy cited?
which one?
That the creator doesn't create but experiences itself.
Um, I'm not sure. I mean, I think that
It kind of throws the question back on itself, right? Well, then what does
yeah.
experience mean? If experience, that's kind
Well,
of the problem that I was having with my paper on channeling that I've been working on, which is that to explain channeling, you have to explain consciousness. Well, what is consciousness? It seems like in some ways, in the law of one philosophy, consciousness is the basic substrate of everything. Like everything, like sort of rides on top of the surface of consciousness. It's a form of consciousness in some way. Even like material physical reality is a kind of consciousness, right?
I think that, to experience something, it's, in the context of infinity, it has, experience arises in a more limited context arising out of the field of infinity. And so when I think about the one infinite creator, I think about, you know, I'm a Platonist, so I tend to think of things in that way. It's like the one is the identity. It permeates and pervades all experience, and it is experience, but it's something that's above experience as well. That's what gives rise to the experience.
Well, by one, are you referring to infinity as yet unpotentiated, as yet uh, without a sense of a subject?
Um, yes, I am. I'm
Then,
saying it's I'm saying it's not directly intelligible to me.
well, I mean, uh, I wouldn't claim to have a capacity to conceptually grasp what it would mean for infinity become intelligent to experience itself. But I could grasp the concept that what I understand as experience is a facet of the creation in which creatures participate in the creator in such a way that without that facet being in place, the creator could not experience itself.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with that. Um, I think that it's inextricably linked to, like, the instances of entities experiencing themselves at whatever level of creation are one and the same as the one infinite creator experiencing itself.
Yeah. Stephanie, you had something you wanted to say.
Oh, can y'all hear me? Yeah, okay. Eh, Yeah,
You're a
it's
little
really
muffled.
hard. Am I? Sorry.
You're a smiley face to me. There you are.
Um, this conversation kind of baffles me. I feel like I hit a wall, a mental wall, um, where to venture too far down into discussion, I feel like is mere speculation for me because I just don't feel like I have enough understanding. So somewhere I was listening to Christian and listening to you, Steve, and Jeremy, and this is a big quote for me, and I can't get my head around it. Like, can the one experience itself without can the creator experience itself without creation? To me, those two are so intimately linked, it's hard for me to separate them. Is any of that making any sense?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I mean, totally.
I feel like the words are just tied up in my tongue, somewhere in between my brain and my tongue. It's not.
But look, there was a philosopher once upon a time by the name of Schelling, and uh, Schelling was trying to think through the concept of human freedom, and it was difficult. Am I stepping on your toes, Jeremy? Did you?
Please go ahead.
Yeah, it was difficult because uh, the theology that Schelling had received suggested that God made the world in a certain way, and that there are laws according to which the world works. And human beings are God's creatures, and therefore we would seem to be subject to these laws. And so Schelling was prepared to set aside the traditional theology and to think of God as a process, God, Godding or Godness. But then that makes God creator of God. Now the traditional theology is God God is the uncreated creator. But out of what does God create? God. And Schelling postulated that there was this seething thing, vast cauldron of pure potentiality,
Mhm.
unpotentiated, which Schelling called the abyss, the Abgrund. Uh, and so God is a unified beingness emergent from some prior state, so abysmal that it's a complete mystery, and that human beings stand right at the point of that emergence, right at the center point of that emergence. Now, Schelling didn't have the notion of intelligent beings more intelligent than we are, fourth and fifth and sixth and seventh density and so forth. But uh, uh, Schelling came to the conclusion that God could only know itself through the creatures that stand freely in at that point of emergence. And the notion of intelligence and free will are as tightly bound as two strands of a rope. So that's how Schelling managed to avoid this notion of determinism based on God created everything the way it is, and God has the ability to foretell what will happen. This was a terrible problem in the 19th century, that problem of the potential of living in a deterministic creation. And how can you think free will in relation to that? And without free will, there's no morality.
Right. No sin,
So,
which is
yeah,
what the Calvinists and all them were really, really obsessed about.
right.
Um,
So, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, but before I forget, I want to also point out that because our understanding of experience is so tied to perception and so tied to time, right? We look, we see, and then we understand, we perceive and take it in. Like, we have to think of the creator as because it's outside of time. This must all be very, very different for it.
It
What
changes
we-
the notion of experience fundamentally.
Exactly, because like it's kind of mind-boggling, but we see this entire evolutionary progression from unity through a menagerie of separation back to unity, and we see that trillions and trillions of years of that happening, where I have a sense that the creator sees this as a single thought experiment that is a single moment. And therefore, we have, if it is true that we are kind of the nerve endings of the creator's understanding of itself, what it's
Nice
getting out, what it's getting out of that sensory experience is the whole view, and our ability to serve as information gatherers of the creator comes from our narrow view that we sense just at that point in the nervous system where it needs that nerve ending and no other. So
Absolutely.
it's going to kind of be our very ability to serve the creator keeps us from that unified experience, unless we take extraordinary measures, right?
Such as
to
meditation.
transfer- Yeah.
Such as meditation. So that leads now to the next question. How can we understand the role of meditation as uh, facilitating our responsibilities as a part of, as microcosmic representations of the creator? And it seems to me that when dealing with this notion of experience, we're now turning experience on its head. Normally, when we think of experience, we think of it as a relation to some state of being. And that state of being that we're related to is what we say is that which has been experienced. I experience myself as the meditator. But in meditation, as one gets to the higher levels through Indigo Ray, that situation is reversed, and one no longer is experiencing a state of being. The state of being is the experience. So it's no longer it's now beingness that invests my meditation. And that beingness we find is so open-ended that it doesn't terminate in that self I take myself to be. And at the moment that that realization becomes real, becomes visceral, that's the opening of the gateway to intelligent infinity. Is it me experiencing the creator, or is it the creator experiencing itself in me?
Yes.
Yeah, yes to both.
But I think that there's a certain elegance in just saying, Stephanie, both, because these are two sides of the same coin, and it's so, we want to pick apart that coin, and we really want to understand this side, we want to understand that side as isolated, because that's how our culture, in some ways, that's how our culture trains us to think about it. But and that's how perception works. I keep thinking about the concept of perception when we talk about experience, because I think the big problem we have is that we can't understand an experience that, like Steve was describing, of beingness, of being one with what's being perceived. We have to have this removed. This was part of the Oxall message that just got published today from the Richmond group, where like that isolation that we perceive and sometimes feel sad about in our separation from the creator gives us the ability to take a different position relative to the rest of the creation. And that whole experience is built into how we think about ourselves, how we think about our world, how we think about possibilities. This idea of
except when we meditate.
except when we meditate.
And
Yes.
when we meditate, my experience has been that if I pause to register a moment in that meditation as an experience, I fall out of the flow. And if I want to continue with the flow, if I want to continue to rise on the planes, I have to refrain from doing that. Refrain from, and which is, sometimes people call that thinking, refrain from thinking, or refrain from attempting to say, yes, that's an experience. Attempt to registering something as an experience.
Right.
You lose the as structure of experience.
There was a great Aaron quote from the Aaron Kuo dialogues, where Aaron described this this metaphor of swimming up a river, and you're seeing all these things in the river, and you know you're getting closer to the source, and then you look up and you look around, and as you look around, the current pushes you back.
Yeah.
Right. As soon as you
Right.
tried, and I think they were using it as a way of talking about taking your spiritual temperature, right? Trying to understand where you are without just being where you are. But I think that has both that spiritual experiential side and this more, sort of philosophical side of we cannot really both measure and be. We can only do one at a time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Go ahead, Christian.
I was just gonna say, this sounds awfully similar to remembering a dream. As soon as I start thinking about, my name's Christian and I got X, Y, and Z to do today, and the dream is gone. But
Yeah.
in
Totally.
that halfway state of just being with the dream and the feeling of the dream and the experience of the dream, it is more or less stable and accessible and navigable until waking me boots up, and then it's more difficult
Right.
interact with. Yeah.
Or like another way of representing that more comically is that you remember those Runner cartoons where Wile E. Coyote is chasing the Roadrunner, and the Roadrunner runs off a cliff, and Wile E. Coyote follows him and is doing very well chasing down the Roadrunner until he realizes he's just run off a cliff. And as soon as he realizes that, he falls. It's kind of like
As soon
that.
as he looks down or something like that.
Well, like
Yeah.
it's funny because there's quite a few Kuo sessions where they sort of talk about the salutary nature of looking at our lives as cartoons, as a cartoon, right? As a sort of like stylized, exaggerated thing. And when I think about the exaggerated affect in the coyote, and then down and then looking at the camera with like
Yeah.
pathetic face, like we must look like that sometimes, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
Hey, Steve.
yeah.
I wanted to get back to, I missed a few minutes at the beginning, but you asked about, is there general agreement about I guess, how we defined and what potentiated the term potentiated or to potentiate,
Well,
what
Can
that
we see your
means.
face?
Oh, sorry.
There we go.
Um, and it really got me thinking. I mean, I think I could kind of pick apart every sentence and then still be clueless as to what this paragraph means. But I was wondering if we could kind of revisit that, because I think of it as activated or formed or created, or something that goes from this I think visually a lot, so it's sometimes hard for me to put things into words. But going from this abyss, infinity to a form. But I'm interested to hear if um, what other people think.
Well, before you get to form, you have this distressingly uh, elusive concept of focus. There's before you get to intelligent energy, there has to arise in awareness something called focus. And I'm taking the focus to be a concept coordinated with potentiation. And until you have focus or potentiation, you don't have intelligence. And until you have intelligence, you don't have intelligent infinity. So the really unique thing about this theology is that intelligent infinity arises as the moment of focusing or potentiating infinity, which is presupposed as already being there. This vast whatever, it's unformed, and so the first focus is that of the creator, and out of that focusing, the creator discerns a concept, and the concept is that of manyness, but manyness is coordinated with the notion of will. So the free will of the creator is what gives the possibility of thinking the concept of manyness. And so we must conclude that within the free will of the creator, there is a realization of the capacity to distinguish that from this, focus, that from this, two foci. Well, if there's two, there's potentially an infinite number of foci. And so the notion, and so the creator discerns within itself that the condition for the possibility of achieving focus is the free will of the creator. And if there can be one focus, there can be an infinitude of foci, which means that the creator can invest itself in an infinitude of foci of free will, which then becomes the basis for intelligent energy arising. And out of that intelligent energy, there coalesce foci also of other intelligences, which is what Ra calls the sublogoi. And then we are sub to those sublogoi, but we have this, the structure is isomorphic all the way down the line. It's the same structure that repeats itself ad infinitum. So we are like little gods,
Co-creators
co-creators,
or
because
sub
we have
sub.
sub, yeah, but we have, we, and in a visceral sense, what that means to me is that when I meditate and reach down into that abyss, I'm at the same place that the creator is. And if I project that onto the uh, archetypes, I get uh, the dark night of the soul. These are matrix of the spirit, and then the potentiator of spirit. that moment, the matrix is like a mirror which allows experience to happen. But from the standpoint of a description of the experiential domain, that's first. But it's first in such a way that it always presupposes as something that always already has happened, the potentiation. So what is first, the matrix or the potentiator? The matrix is first in such a way that it presupposes as the potentiator is before it.
Well, it seems pretty like you're imposing something like a linear understanding of something that doesn't operate within the
Because
limitations of a linear world. Like it almost like you just explained it yourself right there. Like even like when you like went into in your meditation, you reach the point where it's beyond experience and it's just being. As soon as you try and register the experience, you're kicked back out because
Totally.
that sort of perception and that it doesn't exist there, or it's not. It's it's just not possible. But that's okay. You know what I mean? Like it's like that's kind of how it's supposed to work because in this little like in our little third density personality experience when we're in isolation and we only have our own thoughts and our own world like any like that we don't have like the fourth density connection and full spirit or collective consciousness, you know what I mean? We don't have that yet, so like
That's true, but consider this. What is the paradox of intelligent energy? Rod describes as the intelligent energy paradoxically expresses itself in the lenticular form as a line.
right.
you can go even further to this another quote from session 82 where they say infinity has a center. How can that be? And to me, that's the primary like paradox that focus represents, right?
And this is where Christian, having read Bruno, will say Bruno describes God as that being in which the center is nowhere and the periphery is everywhere, right?
Right. Yep. That's been coming up a lot because of how much
Or the periphery is nowhere and the center is everywhere.
right, right. Because we've been talking about this orbital model of consciousness in the Richmond group a lot. That quote has come up quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. So the lenticularity, the linear thinking, it doesn't is not just an accident of our limitations. It's kind of built in.
Yeah, well, like it says, holographic style all the way
All the way down.
down all the way back up.
Yeah.
The interesting thing that I've been thinking about is what Stephen in his book of Fool's Phenomenology called a psychogeography that's implied by all of this, right? That there's a relation of position that's implied if we talk in terms of focus spatially, if we talk in terms of like a center, right? It starts to cast this whole set of relations that can start to obtain, and you can start to see how out of something very simple an infinity of division and separation can evolve out. I can't quite explain it yet, but I can sort of feel it.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's I don't know about you, but I would love to open the gateway to intelligent infinity before I shuffle off this mortal coil. But why do I want to do that? So that I can have the experience of doing it? But if I want to have the experience of doing it, I'll never do it because it's not an experience. It's a state of being. And if you step out of the flow so that you can experience it, as you say, you're falling back and you're being pushed back by the current.
Yep. I would point everybody on this subject to Hatan Latouille from May 1st, 1983. They talk about just this thing, that it's good that we strive and we seek for an object, for the creator, right? But at a certain point, you cannot go through that process of transformation, or that moment of transformation, I should say, until you become that which you seek. And it no
Yeah.
longer is about pushing yourself and grasping and reaching towards something. It's about this stillness and this transformation that occurs. I think it's very important concept in spiritual seeking, because otherwise it can just seem like a scavenger hunt perpetually.
Do you have that date again? Stephanie wants
May
the date.
1st, 1983. It's seared in my brain. It's my favorite Confederation channeling. Maybe I should do a session on that. I've been wanting to write a paper on it for the longest time.
I'll do it. But if you write a paper on it, you're not being it, Jeremy.
Well, I can temporarily offset that.
Sometimes when I meditate on what we're talking about here, and again, I have a lot of visceral sensations, I have a lot of imagery, which don't necessarily convey easily with my language. So, what am I trying to say here? When I'm deep in meditation, sometimes I get to a space where my experience is not defined simply by my personality shell known as Stephanie. It's this great expansive space. And I don't know if it's indigo space. I don't have a name for it, because it just simply starts to defy the four corners of my experience as a 3D human.
Mm-hmm.
And I just sense an immense amount of power there, which is kind of a little bit scary to me. And that's where I might, as Christian said, wake up from the dream. Like, oh, wow.
Totally. It is. It's that's the dark night of the soul experience, because you have to cross this great abyss, and it can be terrifying. If you're the coyote. Don't look down. All right. Or there's another experience. You remember Ghostbusters? Whatever you think about will come back on you. And the guy,
Choose the destructor.
he starts thinking of the Pillsbury Doughboy, which is the most innocuous thought you could think. And this horrible big Doughboy
Yes.
comes in for that. Yeah. So that's right. It's walking the tightrope without a safety net.
And wondering how much of my experience am I simply creating,
It doesn't matter anymore at that point.
but not aware of how much I'm creating it, how much power we each truly have to create and manifest our own experience.
Well, who do you mean I when you say that?
Precisely.
Because if
Yeah.
you've opened the gateway to this really portentous power, that comes from you, but from beyond you. You just become a channel for that.
So it implies, the thing that keeps me up at night, which is, what am I then? Right? We know for a fact that we're not our personality.
Well, except unless you define it as the magical personality.
Even that will go away, though, right?
Well, we don't know. We don't
You
know if
can't keep
there's.
changing the scale of reality at which we're talking. On me. Yes, everything is everything at a certain level, and nothing is nothing
Yeah,
at another level.
but
Yes, bounce.
remember we had a session on that, a cool session where the question was, will we be completely dissolved into absolute unity at the end of the octave, or will there be some scintilla of meanness still resident in the creator?
I don't care how much of it is. I care what it is. Right?
Yeah.
What is it that's unique about it?
Will the whatness be washed into the great oceanic beingness?
Yeah, just completely consumed.
Well,
Yeah.
the
Or
implication.
will there be a little thing that I can still call myself?
Well, the implication. Sorry, Christian, but the implication of that session, I thought, was that remember how we were talking about an inborn intelligence in infinity that gets expressed? What it implies is that we are the most basic inbuilt intelligence that continually gets expressed, octave after octave after octave.
Whether that is articulated or loses all articulation in the transfer from one octave to another.
A mere detail, right?
Yeah, it seems important to me at the moment. Maybe I'm
Christian, sorry to cut you off, Christian.
No, that's fine. You know, I'm brought back to that idea or the image of there being a center to infinity. And, you know, a logos, I think, is this awareness is like inseparable from that. It's like a confluence of awareness in intelligent infinity and intelligent energy meeting and perceiving awareness. It seems like to me that is like in relationship to a center, like there is a something that allows stability through that infinity, and I think it is that pattern of
it would seem to have to be if infinity can build on itself, right? If there's growth, but awareness in the primordial sense isn't yet self-awareness, right? And so the question is centered logos a function of awareness only when it becomes centered as self-aware? So we have the question of self-referentiality or reflexivity in consciousness. So a rock is aware, but has no self-reflexive capacity.
but the spirit attaches at some point in conscious evolution, right? I mean, and at
that point, reflexivity comes into play, right? But that would seem to be the centering moment. Am I wrong?
no, it's just, you know, at its most basic, its beginning form, beginning developmental stage in that journey. Yeah. Well, I mean, awareness, it without self-awareness comes before that. If we're thinking linearly, you know, trying to coerce linearity into it, but
yeah.
But that's what comes
Thank
to
you,
mind.
Tiffany.
That's what comes to mind with the I question, as close as you can get to something like that. Is it's a center, you know, it's a focus, it's a, you know, logos, but it has some participation in the logos that generates it. You know, there's a
I-
and I think that the the gateway to intelligent infinity is something of like recognizing that like you're the hand that has its like you are the one that has your hand inside the glove, you know, like that for your own individuated experience as such. Like you recognize yourself as both that and intelligent infinity, and that being, you know, the exercise of your free will.
So building on that, I want to suggest something that I've been thinking about, which is that what we consider to be our self-conscious, perceptive self is not the center. It is something orbiting around a center. And that gives us the ability to introject towards the center and also project outside of the center. This is something that I'm working on based on largely a lot of the Monka sessions that the Richmond Circle did in 2023. But the idea being that the center is that creator, and it's that creator in any context in which it finds itself in the phenomenal illusion. And we sort of take up a position relative to it. And as we evolve, we learn to orbit around increasingly centralized centers, right? And we form relationships with other centers around new centers. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I think it's important because it explains what this kind of perceptive experience that we've been jostling about is about. It's this kind of bivalent reflexiveness that reaches towards infinity in one direction or the other, right? A point geometrically is infinitely small, right?
Yes.
So if you're orbiting around a point, you can infinitely ingress in and you can infinitely expand out. You have these, but the position, your consciousness is at a certain like orbital circumference, right? It's like a certain position relative to that center. And that is how that might be a model for how consciousness works. It moves in, it moves out, and it finds new centers. And it also explains how we relate to each other. This might be Martin Buber, that I and Thou book, but he talks about how communities form around centers, and that they get the relation to the people that are also around the center through the radius, right? Through the connection to the center. It's through the connection to the center that we relate to the others in our orbit.
So, but here's going to be the puzzle. Do I have access to intelligent infinity in such a way that it's mediated by the social complex in which I participate, and perhaps by the logos of which I am a sublogos? Or do I have direct access? Now, my understanding is that Ra's position is that the access is direct.
I think you can have access both ways. In fact, I think those are two different ways of experiencing individuation. One way is to directly access the center of beingness and thereby become what you seek. The other is to sort of this way access other things orbiting that center and take your relation to the center through them.
Is there a dialectical or otherwise conceived relationship between those two paths?
Yes, I would think they would have to be. Like this to me is a model of pure dialectics here.
Yeah, how might that be conceived then?
I'm still working on that. I'm trying not to get too far ahead of the Confederation sources who are inspiring this, you know?
Well, sometimes you have to take the lead. If
Maybe.
you got a problem, you got to follow the where the problem leads you, don't you?
Yeah. I think maybe what would help would be like, what kind of question would a more dialectical understanding of this attempt to be addressing.
Well, uh, the social energy, perhaps social memory complex to which we're related, uh, is not a static thing. So it has to be able to grow and develop. And by virtue of what capacity would it be able to do that? Well, it would have to be uh, by virtue of a capacity that is drawn from the individuals through their unique access to intelligent infinity. Would that not be true?
I that's certainly how I conceive of it. Because it's that because to in this model, we are using gravity as a kind of spiritual analog for love, for the second distortion. The first distortion, in my view, kind of provides the impetus for the scattering. And then love is that principle that's going to bring everything back together.
Now remember, these distortions are of intelligent infinity, not infinity as undistorted
Right.
or as unpotentiated.
Yet they only have meaning in a subject object world.
And
Yeah.
and it's the primordial access, the most primordial point of access that Rawls speaks of has to be that we draw this portentous power from undistorted infinity. That's the sense in which we are co-creators, because that's where the creator or
Yeah.
intelligent infinity draws its beingness from.
Maybe it's the pattern of inbuilt potential provides the addressability of intelligent infinity in a way that otherwise we wouldn't be able to address it and thereby access it, right? There would be nothing to
And,
turn on to.
doesn't that put the problem of evil in a unique context? Because this is one of the most striking things about the law of one when I first read it, was that there are rights, sort of inbuilt or intrinsic rights, that belong to those who take the path of service to self, which I would be entirely prepared to deny them if left to my own devices, because they have access to that portentous power every bit as much as we do.
It almost seems like a lot of the unique learning happens on that pole because it's about in this octave, how does intelligent infinity actually get leaked into the illusion and shake it up, right?
Or how does it willingly block itself in such a way that separation becomes the theme?
Right, that addressability being the thing that keeps me coherent as an actor, such that I can relate to infinity through this potential. I mean, because in order for it to be service to self, I have to be able to act. I have to be able to feel that I am in control.
But one could understand that, as I think perhaps was primarily the case in previous octaves before service to self was discovered as a potential,
Yeah.
as merely a certain set of steps on the way,
Yeah.
rather than being a value or commitment.